Hi, this is Scott Smith. My name's Wendy Ertnowski, and we're going to try to help you sheet a foam wing today. We're going to do a little demonstration on this video, and basically it's going to be Scott Smith doing the work and Wendy working the camera. His helper is Chris McMillan from, where are we from today? California. Parts unknown, just like the wrestlers. All right, and we're going to basically be working with foam wing parts and joining sheeting, and hope you get some good... One of the things I want to mention to anybody that's going to do this foam wing is in the last year or so there's become an extreme shortage of 4 to 6 pound balsa wood, and obviously getting good quality wood is one of the prime steps of doing a foam wing. Now, Scott Smith and myself order relatively large amounts of wood at any given time, and we're probably able to have some that'll meet the requirements you need, but there's absolutely no guarantee that you're always going to get the lightest possible wood in the world. So keep in mind, even if you get wood yourself, you get 100 sheets of wood, you probably only get 8 or 10 that you really want to use out of that. And that's obviously one of the biggest components in a foam wing, and one of the biggest criteria of a foam wing is keeping the weight down to a reasonable amount. Let's just mention on the video again too. Scotty just wanted to get some wax paper. That there's several sources of getting good wood, and traditionally what has to happen if you're going to sheet a wing yourself, you have to put your name on a waiting list from SIG or Lone Star or any of the places that'll get you the good wood, and you probably have to reasonably go through you know, 3 or 4 times the amount of wood you want before you're going to wind up with the kind and the quality and the lightness that you expect to get. All right, I guess the first step we're going to do is try to true up some sheeting and join the edges.
Okay, before we get started, let's just touch on some basics. To do a good foam wing panel, to get your sheeting nice, you've got to have a good building surface to start with. You need a level surface as well. This is a plain interior door covered with a sheet of glass, and then checked with a straight edge to make sure that we've got a perfectly flat working surface. Now, if there were some deviations in it, like your door has a bow in a given area, you can shim it up with paper or whatever and keep rechecking your glass until you've got a good straight work surface to work on. If you do a foam wing, or any other wing for that matter, on a crooked surface, you're going to end up with a crooked wing. Okay, bearing that in mind, we're starting with a good level, clean work surface. Alright, the first thing that we're going to do is make up our master sheeting panel, a large panel to cover the entire wing. To join the sheets of wood, if you just push these together, they don't mate that well. So the first thing that we need to do is true them up to get nice clean edges so that when we join them, the seam virtually disappears. Okay, and we do that by taking a good straight edge, and I'll talk just briefly about straight edges.
I'm going to try to show them just how much this one sheet is off just by running the camera down it. Usually they're off by a good 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch.
Okay, when you go to buy a straight edge, think of it as a tool, because it is just that. The better the tool, the better your work is going to come out. Now, you can go into various stores and buy aluminum straight edges, or I know a lot of guys will use an aluminum yardstick as a straight edge. Most inexpensive tools like that are in fact not straight. If you want to check them, put it down on a piece of paper, draw a straight line, pick up your straight edge, turn it around, and then try to redraw right on top of that same line. You'll usually find a bow in the center area. That is not a true straight edge. It's a bowed edge, and it's going to mess you up every time you try to use it. So
Using, I'll just take this for a second, Scott. Using brand new razor blades or X-Acto knives or Uva skivers, whatever you're going to use, definitely is a good tip. Don't try using up, you know, the razor you just got done scraping the floor with or cleaning the litter box out with. Use a brand new razor to get a nice clean joint. Don't try to run a mobile economy run on razors here.
Monitor's not active, you know.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, we're going to true up this edge to start with. So we just put the straight edge along the edge of our first panel. We're going to knock off approximately a 1/16 of an inch here. When you're making this slice, try to hold the knife perpendicular to the work surface and take one clean slice. Keep pressure on your straight edge as you draw, because you don't want it to move on you. And just keep coming on through. This has a couple of hard spots in it, so I didn't quite get all the way through it. So I'm just going to have to redraw here.
Whenever I do this kind of cutting myself, Scotty, I try to go halfway through on the first cut and then go through. If you try to go all the way, at least my own self, if you try to go all the way through and it catches the grain of the wood at a knot, you get a ripple almost every time.
Okay, now the sheet that we're going to mate it to.
You can mention that you only have to true the sides that you're actually going to join. The leading edge and trailing edge pieces can be a little bit off for all purposes.
All right. Okay, so now we'll trim this one up. One little hard spot in here, it doesn't want to release. There we go. Alright, now that we've trued those up, we put the two edges together that we trimmed. You'll now see that we can get a perfect mate in there and make everything disappear, so that once this is joined, you'll see a virtually seamless panel. Now that's just one quick way of truing up these edges. Now if you happen to be someone who's not too good at holding a constant angle with your X-Acto knife, or whatever brand knife you're using, a second way to do this is to physically trim two sheets at the same time. Alright, we'll go back to our untrimmed edges here. Okay, this is the first edge that we're going to trim, and I'm going to bring a second sheet up here, just leave a little space in there, and the second edge that I'm going to trim, I'm going to overlap our first edge by about 1/8 of an inch. Okay, then we'll lay our straight edge on.
You're going to, in effect, try to cut two at once?
Taking off a 1/16 of an inch from each panel at a time. Okay, now if your knife angle varies from right to left as you make the draw down the panel, when you push the sheets back together, that will be compensated and will still mate. Okay, let me draw this down. Oh, my first panel's moving on me. Hang on just a second here.
You want to have Chris hold that for you?
Check my alignment.
Chris, you want to give him a little hand with this?
Just you can step on the other side. We're going to put this over here just to help hold.
Yeah, we're working off a glass table. It tends to be a little slippery.
Here, Chris, you can just come on the other side here. Okay. Alright, now we're going to cut right through both panels at the same time.
So one angle actually compensates for itself in the second piece as long as you don't move them.
Exactly.
If you join those two edges. And you do have a little wave, one will compensate for itself.
Okay, that should give it to us. more than I wanted to off the bottom. And one little point that's stuck here. Just try to carefully clean that up and pop that away. Now, these two will come together. Same thing, and as we join them, that seam will disappear. And if you varied your knife angle to the right or left as you drew, it will self-compensate and remate.
Okay, now you can see how tight that seam is relative to the size of his fingernails. And if you don't start with that seam, one of the things I've found anyway is if you have a lot of glue in that joint and it's a ripply seam, after you finish it, you take the plane out in the sun, the wood will expand a certain amount normally and the glue joint doesn't, and you get those seams popping right through the sheeting. And there goes all your hundreds of hours of buffing and sanding down the tube. So that's something you really want to try to get right off the bat. Okay, what I want to show, and I don't want to make a big project out of it, but this is a little gizmo that Dave Midgley made that comes apart. It's two pieces of Cradle, which is a real hard plastic, and it has dowel pins on it. And needless to say, you could make this yourself. Anybody with access to a milling machine can make this. You drop a piece of sheeting in. This is a trued surface. Line it up so about a 64th of it sticks out, or how much you want to have stick out. Just drop this right down, leaving a little bit sticking out. In the same way, now the object of this is, this keeps it, this holds it for you, much like Scotty was having trouble. You don't need that. Sliding along. Now you just go down that, and that piece is perfect and ready to go. Obviously everybody doesn't have access to this, but if you were going to do several foam wings yourself, you could get two pieces of this material and run two dowel pins through it. Any machine shop can do that for you for about 10 bucks. Drop it down and you've got yourself a little gizmo to, for the rest of your life you'll have. By the way, you can use this on fuselage tops and edges and just about anything. You also can trim 5 or 6 sheets at a time, which I didn't bother doing because we don't have that much wood to do. But just wanted to show this. This was made by Dave Midgley in Massachusetts for me, and it's a really useful tool. Now let me put this back. Now what you have on the table here is wax paper. What brand of tape is that? 3M masking tape?
Quite honestly, this is any brand of masking tape. When it comes to masking tape working on foam, the cheaper the tape, the better it seems to work. It also applies with the sheeting. The most inexpensive tape I can find, this happens to be
Tuck tape.
Tuck brand.
I found that the real cheap brand of 3M that they sell in Rickles is just perfect. It doesn't, it comes off without leaving a little bit of glue everywhere.
You pay $5 or $6 for a roll of that real good masking tape, and quite surprisingly, you'll find it doesn't work worth beans on foam. Alright, so now we're preparing to join these two sheets that we trued up. Now, as you've already seen just from watching us true up edges, there's numerous ways of doing everything. We're just going to try to show you the methods that we use, and we'll tell you about some of the more common methods. Now, I like to get my sheets set up, and I put some pressure together on them without raising the center, and just put some masking tape over it. Now, as I go along, I'm pushing both edges down so that they end up flush with the glass underneath. As you'll do this, you will see that there are definite thickness differences in the wood that you buy. Even though it's supposed to be a constant 16th inch sheeting, right in through here I can see that I've got a good 64th of an inch differential. Alright, so the side that is down against the glass will become our finished surface that will be facing outwards on the foam itself. The side that is now facing us will become the side that will go against the foam. And as I'm putting these together, I don't want to lose track of which side is the good side, or the finished side, and which side has the big variations in it, and I refer to that as the foam side. So I'll take a pen and I'll write right on here that this is the foam side. All of your big differences in the wood will be on this side. So if you come up with any low spots, rather than trying to sand your sheeting down to a 32nd of an inch thickness or something to blend them out, you can leave them on the side that will go against the foam. If you did that on the side that will be your final finish side, you just created all kinds of work for yourself. In doing your finish, you're going to have to fill them and sand them and over until you get them out. Okay, now as you can see, this is trying to pop on us because I've put pressure to hold this joint together. So I just take a weight or two, put them across here anywhere. Alright, I have a lot of weights like this in my shop. This is nothing more than probably about 4-inch hot rolled steel, readily available from any machine shop. I have them slice it off for me in various lengths, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14-inch lengths. Makes great weights for doing almost anything in your shop. Okay, cut us there.
This is going to be an advertisement for Zap CA. This is the brand that he's intending to use, and what I want to make a point of is if anybody isn't using that little Teflon tube that goes in the end and always gets clogged up, if you try to do the job, that's this little guy here, if you try to do this job without that and with a pin-size hole in the end of this nozzle, you will probably 3/4 of the time be gluing the wood to the wax paper, the table, your fingers, or something that's undesirable. So first thing to do, first order of business, is get the little tube ready to go and get him in good shape.
All right, now these happen to both be thin CYA type adhesives. This is the conventional one that we've all been used to for quite a few years. All right, this is the new UFO, and UFO stands for user friendly odorless. For you folks who find that you have reactions or your eyes are highly irritated by the CA type adhesives, this UFO is great stuff. It in fact does not smell. There's no burning sensation if you happen to breathe in some fumes of it. Doesn't irritate your eyes. And from my personal usage of it, I find it to be every bit as strong as the conventional style of CYA glues. The only difference that I have noticed in it is that the UFO series glues do take a couple extra seconds to kick off. Now, when I'm making up a sheeting panel like this, I actually prefer to use hot stuff or the regular Zap CA because it sets instantly. The UFO will do the same job, but you're going to notice that it'll take about maybe 3 to 5 seconds for it to kick off. Sometimes that's a benefit to you. I can't really think of any time where it's detrimental, but there is a kickoff time differential.
Okay, one of the things I wanted to mention, I've seen a lot of people that I've tried to help do this, they try to use kicker. They run the seam down there and they get impatient, hit it with kicker, and they just ruin 2 sheets of wood. I don't know if you have a better technique of doing that, but I've never found kicker to be a big help when doing these kind of seams. Fresh glue is the answer, not a more kicker.
All right, that is true. Wendy was starting to tell you about the Teflon tubing tips for these. If we can just drop down, you can see that both have tips on them. All right, what you don't want to do when making sheeting panels is get an excessive amount of glue on them. Especially if you hit it with zip kicker or similar brand of accelerator, you're going to make it foam or create a large hardened puddle on the top that you're in fact going to have to sand off. And sanding hardened CA in a big lump like that really is difficult. You want to use the minimum amount of glue that you can to still have a good solid joint. Alright, so we're going to start along here. Alright, now, I keep pressure on both sheets, pushing them together while I'm gluing. Now I'll check that both surfaces are down flush against the glass. And then I'll just run a very light bead right down the seam. Now you can actually miss the crack by a 32nd of an inch or so. The way that hot stuff tends to seep into joints, it's no problem, it's going to go right into it. Now when I come to a piece of tape, I'll physically remove it.
Okay, you can pick that up.
Alright, so we'll take this tape off. And then we'll reapply our pressure and continue down the joint. Notice I'm moving fairly rapidly so that the glue doesn't build up on me. And when I get to any obstruction, like my weight is in my way now, I'll stop. Wait just a moment for that to kick off. Now every now and then you'll notice that an area, for some reason or other, doesn't want to kick. And I don't know if you can see it, but right here is an area that's not kicking at the moment. So I'll just take my finger and wipe across it. And that seems to kick it right off. Okay, now we're going to move the weights and set up here again.
What you're actually doing there is picking up little grains of sawdust, and it's the sawdust that kicks this off instantly.
Alright, now we're just about to hit another piece of tape, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that.
By the way, that's a good trick. If you just before you run a hot stuff seam, if you take a piece of 400 sandpaper and just touch the joint the slightest little bit to make some dust, it's the dust will kick that hot stuff off almost instantly, especially if it's old CA.
Right, now again, before I start, I'm going to press both edges down to make sure that they're flush against the glass. Apply my inward pressure and pick up my seam and continue to run it. Okay, I'm doing about 4 inches at a time. That seems to be comfortable for me personally. You can do more if you're capable, but 4 inches seems to be comfortable for me personally. Okay, now when the joint is really going well and you're getting a near seamless joint, you're going to find that you're going to have problems keeping track of where the actual joint is. So sometimes,
Especially if you're over 40.
I'll take a pen and just give myself rough guidelines of where that joint is at points where I can see it. And that will help me maintain an eye on where that joint is as I glue it. Now, my son had a lot of trouble doing this. My son is 12 and he's sheeting a wing right now. So before we ever put these panels together, we took a black magic marker and ran it all the way along the edge of one sheet. That created a black line for him to follow as he glued them together. Alright, so we're going to pick up back here where we left off. And I'm feeling with my fingers to find out where I left off with the glue, which is right about here. And we'll continue along.
Keep in mind that we're trying to gear this video toward the entry-level person, not the super experts and people that have done this for years probably could learn something from this video, but need not. But the entry-level person who's bought his first foam wing probably should be watching this over 2 or 3 times and picking up all little tips. A lot of these things might have slipped by you to get that the maximum amount out of the wing you've just purchased or that you've cut yourself.
So we just continue down the crack. Each time we come to a piece of tape, we just remove it.
It might seem that this takes a long time to do, but to do it correctly and to do it at a level where these seams are not going to pop through the finished model is actually, you know, the trade of doing foam wings. And I'm sure Scotty has found out that the more you do, the better you get. And if your first one doesn't come out perfect, don't be really super discouraged. Just be sure that your second and third one, each one is going to get a little bit better. And they will. Almost if just by doing them over and over, you'll get a little techniques and a better feel for the wood. And almost inevitably, each one will get a little bit better to the point where you're in the front row at the Nationals.
Also, this is taking a lot of time only because I'm trying to think of everything to tell you as we do this. Now, if you notice, when I hold my glue, I've been holding it at a 90-degree angle to the seam itself. Most people tend to hold it like this and draw this way. That is one way that you're going to get about 3 times as much adhesive on this joint as you really want. By coming in at 90 degrees, oops, not high enough here, and drawing along, it actually continues to draw excess glue along with you rather than leaving it deposited. And we're starting to run out of this tube.
That's a good little trick, by the way, holding that tube sideways. Another thing, too, just to mention is don't ever hold the tube straight up and down. I've seen a person who I will not mention their name on video do that and pour about an ounce of hot stuff onto the first 1-inch of joint, glued it to the table, glued his hand to the table. Too much of that stuff comes out if you hold it at a very high angle. Just how he's just done this is probably the best way.
Now I'll try to turn around, maybe you can get a better idea. Try to draw the other way. Okay, I bring the bottle up just high enough so that I'm starting to get flow out the tip, and bring it right along. Make sure they're pressed together, and rub it a little to set it. Now I don't know if you can see it, but there's an awful step right here, a good 32nd of an inch, and that's typical of what can happen to you as you join sheeting panels and you see the thickness difference in the wood. By keeping our finished surface down against the glass, we're minimizing these types of differences, and we'll end up with any irregularities ending up against the foam instead of being exposed in our finish. So,
I haven't built that many models, but over the past 5 years or so I've been using this glue, and I've never really been that successful with it. A lot of it would not go off, and I was a chronic abuser of zip kicker, and the stuff would build up, which is very undesirable on this stuff, as Wendy and Scott have told you. And I guess the main thing is to have new glue.
Having new glue is the biggest new. And by the way, if you buy it from a hobby shop that doesn't sell a lot and they don't keep it in the freezer, the odds are good it's going to be a little on the stale side by the time you get it. Several of the good hobby shops keep it in a refrigerator, I'm sorry, not a freezer. Or if you order it from a place like SIG where it'll come to you, they're turning over so much of it that it's almost guaranteed going to be new. The worst place to buy it is from a little hobby shop that doesn't specialize in model planes, and they might only sell 1 tube a day. Well, you know the stuff on the shelf, especially in the back, is going to be 6-8 months old, and it's going to be kicker city trying to get it to go off.
now another problem I know that people have with this glue all the time is it going bad in the bottle, where it becomes extremely thick and unusable. Now this particular bottle, if you notice, it's about half gone. I've had this one open for over a month. Whenever I use it, as soon as I'm done, even though I have the piece of Teflon tubing sticking out of it, I'll take the cap and just let it set on there like that. That keeps ambient air and moisture out of that tip and out of my glue. And I've had bottles open as long as 2.5 months in partially used state like this with no problem whatsoever. As I say, this particular bottle has already been open about a month. I've got a bottle of thick style here. This bottle's been open closer to 2 months, and it still has its regular consistency. Just by keeping the caps on. It keeps dust and, as I say, ambient air that contains moisture out of these bottles and gives you much longer shelf life. Okay.
Okay.
All right, Chris was asking me about my method of keeping it flat against the glass. I've just flipped up what will be our finished side, and if you notice, there is little, if any, surface differential at the joint itself. So this side should require very little sanding to finish it off. But when we come back to the side that we referred to as the foam side, there are some major differences in the thickness at that joint. Also on the finished side, very little hot stuff is seeped through into the surface, making this joint easier to final sand with no marking. Any excess glue that we have is still on the foam side and will represent no problem when it's against the foam. Some people tell me that if they have an excessive amount of adhesive on the surface of the wood, where it creates like a puddle, and a hard puddle, that they have some problems getting paints to adhere to it. This again will put any excessive adhesive on your epoxy side that will go against the foam. So you're eliminating giving yourself some finishing problems. Alright, so we'll finish up off camera and create our master panel. It'll all just be together here, so as we get going I can just go.
Alright, we've got all the sheets joined now for one of the foam wings. I'll take the last piece of tape off now.
And just join the last couple inches here. And we'll get the tape off this other end. And don't forget to glue those areas where you've lifted the tape off, or that joint will separate on you. Now we've cheated a little bit since we're in Wendy's shop here and it is relatively small. We finished up all the panel except the last sheet, and we have it sanded down smooth. In order to minimize the amount of balsa dust that we spread around the shop, we're just going to sand in this last panel to match, and we'll go over that sanding process as we do this. Now remember that we still have a foam side and a good side to this panel, and we're going to start our sanding on the foam side. Get our wax paper out of here.
These are the various grits of paper. I see you get 60, 100, okay, and a sanding block.
Okay, now we're going to start, well, first off, let's talk about a sanding block. Get yourself a large block to do this with. This one is approximately 4 inches by 12 inches. And round the edges off very slightly, especially on the corners. As you're working on your paneling, if you happen to raise up, you don't want to dig a sharp corner in here and make a big ding that you're going to have to repair later. So just round the edges down slightly. Alright, now this is 60 grit paper, but quite honestly it is used 60 grit paper, so it's not all sharp and as coarse as you would expect. If I didn't have a piece of worn 60, I would actually start with 80 grit.
Hold it on.
Now, when you're sanding, I also highly recommend that you wear a mask of some sort. A plain paper mask like this They're available from your local hardware store. They usually come either in packs of 5 or 10, and it's like $2 for a pack of 5. You're really going to make a lot of balsa dust, and it's not such a great idea to be inhaling it. Because we're videotaping, I can't wear a mask and talk because you'll never understand me, so I'm going to forego it here. But I definitely recommend that you use a mask whenever you're sanding. Alright, now we're starting off, as I say, with our foam side facing upwards. And all we're going to do is take this 60 and try to knock off any drastic thickness differences. Right in here I feel one, and down in this area I feel it. So I'm just going to very lightly, now you do not want to press when you're sanding. I'm literally holding the paper to the block and barely holding the block against the balsa. You do not want to press. You'll never get this level if you press. And you always want to sand with the grain. However, if you have some very difficult areas on the foam side, right now you could sand at a slightly diagonal angle to the grain to knock some of that off quickly. But don't try to go right to a flush finish. You just want to knock off the major differential. Because when you diagonal sand, you're scratching the balsa quite well, and you don't want to end up with a lot of scratches in it. So just do it mildly at this point until you get them close, and then go back to your with the grain motion. And we'll just work on this a little bit with this coarse paper just to get us close. All we're doing is saving a little time. We could do the same thing with 100 grit, but it would take about twice as long. We're just trying to get these close and keep feeling them as you go. Remembering not to press. And stay with the grain. Keep feeling your joint. Okay, and once you've got them close, get rid of the coarse paper. Change to 100 grit. Now whenever I change paper, I try to wipe my sanding block off so I don't end up with any chunks trapped between the sandpaper and my sanding block. Blue jeans are great for tapping out sandpaper. Of course, when you wear out the right leg all the time, your wife can't figure out why. Alright, so now we go to the 100 grit. And same thing is true. You want to sand with the grain only. You do not want to press. And you just keep working on it. Go slowly. It's going to take a little bit of time. One of the keys to doing a good foam wing is that when you're done sanding both sides of this wood, you want to have pretty much your finished surface done at that point. You want to be maybe a 400 grit sand away from your final wood finish. So what you're actually going to put on the wing is pretty much what you're going to end up with, minus that 400 grit sanding. Alright, so we'll just stay with this. Now when you're looking directly down at this panel, you're going to reach a point where it looks to you as though you have got that joint perfect. But I suggest you pick the panel up and tip it so that you're skewing light off, and look at that joint, and you'll see that you still have some differences. and we'll have to keep working on those. The closer you get, the harder these differences are to see. So you have to pick it up to skew the light. As long as you're directly over it, you're going to have trouble seeing some of that. Alright, so I'm going to finish sanding up this particular joint off camera, and then we'll come back and polish it off. I just didn't want to waste a lot of...
Okay. We're going to finish this guy up and just keeping Scotty good and busy here. Keep cracking that whip, Chris. He's starting to slow down. Give him another cup of coffee.
Okay, just keep sanding and checking. Okay, we still need some more work on this left end. As you pick up, make sure you wipe away the junk underneath you. If you get...
That's a good tip, because I've seen little mountains of stuff get under the sheeting, and you will sand a hole right in the sheeting, wherever little Mount Everest is underneath.
You sure will.
So I vacuum it up. I got the vacuum plugged in all the time, right down there on the floor.
Oh, well, I'm just throwing it on your floor.
I figured you'd breathe it all in. I wouldn't have to vacuum, save money on electricity.
That's
today.
Chris's job.
Chris, vacuum that up.
So we'll keep working on this.
I'll vacuum, but I won't breathe it.
Breathe deep, the gathering gloom. Hell, when I die, they can take about 3 pounds of 4-pound wood out of my lungs, that's for sure. Be like that ad, you know, for Yul Brynner, where he, after he's dead, I had to make that commercial now. After I'm dead, you can have my lungs. No, it's real unsafe. Vacuum-o-matic. Vacuum it up, guy. Yeah, like I said, it's nice if you can bring your table outdoors when you do this on a breezy day. It's snowing out there now, so we definitely ain't going to sand this sheeting outside. Might want to mention, too, not to ever get the sheeting wet for any reason while it's in this status. Don't drop it around a cup of coffee or all the typical things that might happen. By the way, if you want to rent Chris McMillan for your next foam wing, this man and the master are available for $5 an hour.
Down and level with our 100 grit paper. And then we've cleaned our work surface so we don't have any sawdust creeping in from underneath. Now we're going to flip the panel over, and we're going to work on our good side. See, now there was a little fleck of something that was on the table. I don't know if it was foam or what it was from, but by sanding on there, we literally pressed it right into the wood. Now I just flicked it out, but it left a little
indentation that has to be dapped
indentation
in or repaired.
And a pit there that we're going to have to fix in our final finish. So you really need to be conscious of keeping your work surface clean as you go. All right, now on this side, our good side, we're only going to go at this with 100 grit paper. We won't use anything coarser. And we will only go with the grain. So we really want this side to end up looking nice. The nicer we get this side looking, the nicer our finished airplane is going to look. And by comparison, this side is going to take a lot less sanding than the other side did. The majority of your work is physically done on the other side. And just keep going on this. Remember not to press. Remember to continue going with the grain. And continually check your joint by feeling it and by holding it up and skewing the light off it. And look for any differentials there. Okay, we look pretty good here. Now when you think you've got it, remember every time you pick your panel up, wipe the surface off underneath it. Now when you think you've got that pretty good, we'll flip back to our foam side. we'll change to some 240 paper. Always remember to clear your sandpaper. It gets full of balsa dust, and you're going back and forth making 3 times as much work for yourself. If you clear it, it'll cut much better. Especially in the finer grits, it'll load up much faster. So we'll polish this off on the foam side with some 240. 220 works well also if you don't have 240. I know 240 is particularly hard to find in some areas of the country.
One of the things I think people will realize when they see this video is when you pay somebody $100 or $150 to sheet a wing, when you deduct the cost of the wood and the unavailability of light wood, it's probably the biggest bargain on the face of the earth to have to pay somebody that's highly skilled to do this kind of labor. Because traditionally you would ruin 3 or 4 of these before you got one to come out really good, especially if you didn't have access to a video like this, if you had to use guesswork, or if you were going to try to, you know, reinvent the wheel and kind of try all different glues and had nothing but heavy sheeting, you'd probably wind up with a $300 wing, the first one you made.
All right, I kind of stopped here so you could see just how bad this block is loading up with sawdust. All right, so we want to stop and clear it off. And that's why you're going to wear out the right leg of your pants so fast. But you see, get that off.
So you can put your pants on backwards then and then you wear out the left leg.
Yeah, but it's kind of tough when you got to put it backwards in a hurry.
Just hold it. Don't drink coffee.
Okay, so we just smooth that up now. So you start to get that velvety feel to it. Again, we'll clear our paper. And now we'll flip back to our finish side. And we'll do the same thing using the 240. We're just giving this like a polished sand. We're trying to get off any sanding marks that existed from using the 100 grit paper. And just try to get this so it begins to feel like velvet. Staying with the grain. Always remember, don't press. If you press, what's going to happen is the hard areas formed by the glue at the joints will stay high, and you'll start to sand away balsa in the center, out in the unglued areas, so you're going to end up with a rippling effect if you start pressing on this. So you do not apply pressure.
You make a washboard out of it real easy doing that.
And by not using pressure, you'll also blend those glue joints right in, so that when you've got a coat of finish on here, you're not going to be able to find them once you can't see the grain to show you where the differences are. Okay. All right, we finished sanding this up with a 240 paper. Feels pretty velvety. We've cleaned our work surface back up, and I have the panel laying here again with the foam side up. Here's our notation right over here that this is the foam side, and we're now ready to trim this down to the actual panels that will go on our wing. All right, so we're going to just swing around here. Now the first piece we want to cut is for the top right wing surface. So we'll take the right wing, and we're going to take the top right wing cradle. We're going to bring it over. We're going to flip it so that our flat surface is against the foam side of the wood. Now we're going to align the leading edge with the grain of the wood. Now Wendy, why don't you just tell them about that for strength while I'm lining this up here a little bit.
Yeah, maybe at the end of this video we'll show a couple of what not to do's, but one of them you definitely want to do is you want the grain to run parallel to the leading edge, not the trailing edge. I've seen several people that sheeted their own foam wing and came here with the wing already sheeted, and the grain was parallel to the trailing edge, and you lose a lot of the strength by doing it that way. A wing is a monocoque construction. It gets its strength from the curve in the wood. And if the wood grain is not following the curve, you've lost that amount of the strength. The trailing edge of the wing does almost nothing to contribute to the strength of the wing. You want all the strength at the high point of the wing. And getting the grain to run right down the high point is what we're looking for now. He's just lined up the leading edge.
Okay, we have our leading edge running parallel with the grain. Now, this is a relatively small wing. I've got this little machinist ruler that I use. It's approximately 3/8 to 1/2 an inch wide. I want to trim this panel so that it will be about 1/4 to 3/8 hanging out over the edge of this all the way around. Now you could have more than that, but if you do, it becomes difficult to see the foam as you're putting the sheeting panels on and to keep things lined up. So I like to have enough extra wood so that it sticks out and then I can see it, but not enough that it's really excessive. On a small wing like this, leaving 1/4 to 3/8 extra is plenty. On a larger wing that has a lot of thickness and curvature at the leading edge, you may need more. So take a flexible ruler and physically measure it. Right? If you measured this straight out with a ruler, it would read 6 3/4 on this particular wing. But if you took your ruler and flexed it down into the airfoil, it would probably read 6 7/8. So when you're going to cut your panels out here, make sure you leave enough so that you can make the airfoil and still have some sticking out. Now, I like to just mark these off so I know exactly where to cut them. Haven't had a cigarette in 10 minutes, so I'm shaky as anything.
What about sex?
Well, that's more like 10 years.
I'm impressed. Gotta throw these jokes in every once in a while. You guys will fall asleep watching this video, and you know, probably watching this video right now, and your wife is saying something like, "What are you watching that again for? Put on Looney Tunes."
All right, we just continue marking this all the way around, so I've got about that 3/8 border. And all right, now, as soon as I lift this wing off, I'm going to mark that section. All right, I'm going to put an arrow out here and indicate that that's the leading edge. I'm also going to put a note on here that this is TR, goes on the top right of the wing. Now, by keeping the foam side of the wood up and using the cradle piece that you want to sheet as you cut this out, you're always going to be sure that you have everything in the right direction. All right, so now we want to cut a piece for the bottom of the right wing, so we'll get the bottom right wing cradle.
So you're always working with a match set, top right sheet, top right core.
All right, now again we'll line up our leading edge. With the grain of the wood. And we're going to run right around here just like we did with the other one. And mark it. I've kind of gotten in the habit of making big panels like this. Some of you might be wondering, why didn't I just join 3 sheets and cut it out to do one side of the wing? Yep, cut myself a little short here, but we still have enough there to get away with.
Just make it, huh?
Yep, and just make it. The reason is that usually on a panel like this, I would cut out top right and top left. That would allow me to have one wing here in this direction, and then the other one would flip and come out this way, there's the trailing edges form a diagonal through here that would end up saving me balsa. Okay, or let's say that it took 4 sheets of wood to cover the root and only took 2 pieces of wood at the tip. I've wasted better than half of 2 sheets of wood. So by cutting the opposite piece out and getting that diagonal, now all I had to add was 2 more pieces of wood, let's say for 6 total, and I was able to sheet 2 wings, 2 sides of wings, as opposed to using 4 sheets of wood to sheet 1 side.
So there's a saving on scrap too.
So there's a savings. But for the purpose of this demonstration, we're just going to sheet 1 wing with epoxy anyway. And so I want to get both sides out of this panel. Alright, again, I immediately mark my leading edge before I get this cut out of here and forget what this piece is for. And believe me, if you don't mark them, by the time you're done, you're going to lose track of what went where. Alright, now this is bottom right. And again, I'm marking on the foam side, so this is also going to tell me which side goes against the foam, and therefore which side to smear my epoxy or contact spray on, whatever it is we're going to do. Alright, so we'll just grab our X-Acto knife. And usually I have a straight edge, but I forgot to bring it with me today. A small 24-incher that's great for this work. But we'll just cut these pieces out.
Where do you find a stainless straight edge like that, Scott?
At any art supply store or an engineering drafting supply type of store. Alright, so we'll lift that panel out and we'll set it aside. And we'll get our other one cut out of here. Good straight edges are expensive, especially in stainless steel, but if properly handled, they're going to last you for a lifetime, so it's definitely a worthwhile investment. A 36-inch straight edge, I believe, cost me about $35. The 48-inch straight edge was closer to $60. And straight edges are usually available in 6, 12, 24, 30, 36, 48, and 60-inch lengths. Naturally, the longer it is, the more expensive on a per-inch basis.
But those are guaranteed to be straight. They're not like the hardware store $3.95 aluminum ones.
That is correct.
Which I have a few of sitting over there.
Good for rules, but not good.
Yeah, they're good for measuring inches, but not for doing a straight edge.
Alright, instead of throwing this away, if you happen to know any guys who do some indoor flying, like to make peanut scale models and whatnot, give them your leftovers. They'll love you for it, because you're now down to about a 20th of an inch thickness by the time you've done all your sanding. It's nice light wood, and that's typically what indoor modelers need for building their models. To you it's just scrap, but to them it's gold. Okay. Okay. So now we're going to a blank wing panel here. This wing has been cut, hasn't been sanded yet. We put a spar in it. The spar is made out of light ply. And we just smeared some aliphatic resin on it, like Elmer's Carpenter glue or Type-On. A very light coating of it. Put it in, and we squeeze the wing together against the spar and hold it with masking tape. That's on both top and bottom. of the core. We taped it with some inward pressure. We put it back in the cradles, and we put some weight on it so that the two sections of foam that are split apart here don't separate where your surfaces get like this. It keeps them in line if you weight this back down and let it dry.
Okay, you put a board on the top of this when you're weighting it down?
Actually, I use the metal weights that I was talking about earlier. I have some of these metal weights in various lengths, increment of 2 inches, and I'll take 3 or 4 of them and just put them out here enough to cover the spar, however long a spar is. This spar was 6 inches, so I'll put 6 inches worth of weight out here at least. Okay, just to get some weight on it and to hold those cores in line. Okay, as we're preparing for our sheeting, all your internal woodwork, if you're going to have any, has to be done before you sheet the wing. Now, as I say, we just showed you we put a spar in here. If we were going to use wing-mounted landing gear, we would also have to put landing gear clips in here. Now let's say that we wanted our landing gear to exit at a point 8 inches out from the center of the wing. Alright, our spar would then have to be approximately 10 inches long. We would want a spar at least 1 to 2 inches beyond our landing gear exit point, the point at which the gear would exit the wing. We would then make up what we call landing gear clips that look like this. This is the inboard clip, where you'll have a double thickness of landing gear mount material, has the cutout for it there, and the outboard just has a single thickness. We would cut slots in the foam coming back to the spar, and we would glue these in the wing like that. They would go flush to the spar. And I'll flip over here, so that you would then have a pocket formed by these two cutouts and the spar. And when you glue in your landing gear block, you're gluing it to these clips and to the spar. Alright, but the actual landing gear block itself would not be put in until after the wing was sheeted. Just the spar and the gear clips would be installed at this point. Okay, let me get the tape off of here.
What kind of glue would you use for that?
Same thing, I would use an aliphatic resin.
That's just good wood glue?
Just a good grade of wood glue, Tight Bond, Franklin's, Elmer's Carpenter glue. Basically just like this. They're water-soluble glues, and they tend to be yellow in color. Now actually, I tend to use a lot of aliphatic resin. Besides spars and gear clips, I also use it as my primary adhesive for leading and trailing edges on wings. Now if you went to the hardware store, this happened to be an 8-ounce bottle. Probably cost you $3.75, $4 1/4, somewhere in that ballpark. So I bought it one time, but as I got using more and more, I found out that I could get Tight Bond through Sears or even through some local lumber companies in both quarts and in gallons. Now a quart of Tight Bond through Sears costs $5.
Oh.
That'll fill this up 4 times. So I just saved this bottle because it's got the, you know,
Nice tip,
pop
yeah.
the top and squeeze it out, or squeeze it out type of applicator. And as it gets empty, I just take the top off and fill it up from my quart bottle of Tight Bond.
Good idea.
So it's if you use a lot of aliphatic resin, that's a way to save money. I think a gallon was like $19.
It's real
So,
cheap when you buy
real
it in
cheap when you
quantity.
buy it in bulk like that. Smooth this surface up. If you just run your hand across it, you'll feel that there are some fibers sticking out here like hair almost. And you want to get the best possible contact that you can between the actual foam and your sheeting. Now, I'm using a wing with a spar in it. Spars are not necessary to be internal in foam wings. Windy is a good example of that. He doesn't normally use an in-the-wing spar. Instead, he uses external fiberglass spars. But if you have an inlaid spar like this, as you sand this wing, it's always difficult to sand a soft surface, the foam, and a hard surface, the light ply in here, at the same time. So I usually take my time and try to fit my spars very well before I glue them in so that they don't protrude above the surface of the wing. But if they do, and you have to sand them in order to blend them back down, here's a little trick I'll show you so that you can sand your spar back down without damaging your wing. I'll take a piece of masking tape, put it right on the wing, about 1/8 of an inch away from the spar itself. And I'll do this on both sides. Now, if you just picked up a sanding block and tried to sand this without putting this tape down, what would happen is that you would actually sand flat spots into your airfoil right where this tape is. But by putting this tape here, you're going to stop the sandpaper from hitting the foam at those points, and we'll be able to sand just on the spar. My sanding block here, my 100 grit paper, and I'll just go right on the top of this spar and sand, and I'll try to watch until I see that I'm hitting this little 1/8 of an inch of foam that I've left here. Again, I'll mention one more time, do not press. Anytime you're sanding, I can't really think of any application where you really want to press. Let the sandpaper do the work for you. It may take a little longer, but the results are much better. Alright, now I can see that we're starting to hit the foam there. And by using that tape, I've prevented myself from sanding those flat spots in these areas and ruining my airfoil shape. There's another pass or two right there. You can kind of hear when you stop hitting wood and you start hitting foam and wood at the same time, the sound it makes changes a little. Okay, when you're satisfied that you have that down flush, then you can peel away the masking tape and go ahead and final sand your wing in preparation for sheeting. Okay, I have a slightly thinner sanding block now. This one is about 2 inches wide. I still have 100 grit paper, but again, it's fairly well used. A lot of the sharpness of the edges has been taken away. If you don't have some used 100, a piece of 180 or 220 will do the same job. Now, when you're sanding directly on foam, the critical point is the high point of your airfoil. When you're behind the airfoil, or behind the high point, you can pretty much sand side to side. Again, remembering, do not press. Just very lightly, back and forth, and you'll see the foam get a dull finish and become much smoother. Now, as you approach the high point, you change your angle of sanding to a diagonal and rolling the block as you sand, like this. Okay, don't spend any extra time over the spar, or you will develop those flat spots. Just treat it the same as you do the other areas, sanding a little diagonal and rolling your block as you go. By sanding in that fashion, you'll maintain your airfoil. If you start going back and forth, strictly side to side, all you're going to do is sand a series of flat spots into your airfoil. The same is true of when you're trying to sand a built-up wing. You're trying to sand all the ribs down. use this same motion, and that'll help you maintain your airfoil. Alright, so we'll just continue. Now the one other thing that you want to be extremely careful of is the leading and trailing edge. Stay away from the edges. If you roll over this edge strongly at all, you're going to tear the leading edge or trailing edge right off. So I just try to come up to it without rolling my block enough to go over it and stop at that point. I don't really want to go over it. Just like on balsa, the edges disappear so fast in relation to the rest of the surface that you're sanding. Same with the trailing edge. Stay off of it. One pass like that is enough to smooth that up for the purpose of sheeting. Okay, so you continue, remembering to roll your block and stand at a slight diagonal as you're working over the high point. Okay, now again, if you're standing directly over this and looking down at it, it's all going to look the same to you. So you want to physically pick it up and sight right down it, and you can see if you have any high or low spots or any irregularities left in it. And right up here in the root area of our leading edge, we've got a little area we haven't hit yet, so I'll just touch that up, but other than that, we're all set. Again, very lightly, you do not want to press that diagonal motion and rolling your sanding block. So you maintain your airfoil. Just a very light sanding like that, the wing is all smoothed out and you're ready to go. Okay, we'll just brush that off.
Well, we're getting ready now to actually sheet this wing. This is some of the stuff we brought over for this demo. Scotty's getting ready to actually physically mix the epoxy and sheet the wing.
In a hobby shop, when I walk in and pick up 5 or 6 of these.
He probably loves your house.
No point of putting dead stuff on now. Okay, we're now ready to start getting right down to the nitty-gritty of sheeting our wing. All right, we've got our panels cut, we've got our sanded wing core, and the next step is to vacuum everything off. We want to vacuum the cradles, the wing cradles, the cores themselves, and both sides of the balsa sheeting. We want to get the best possible contact that we can between the sheeting and the wing itself, and bonding to dust isn't going to give us a good grip. So we're going to vacuum this whole assembly off. Now, the method that I'm going to show you is one of probably the most popular methods, is using epoxy to sheet the wing. Now, my personal preference happens to be for hobby epoxy 2. It's a 2-part system, mix equal parts A and B, and it gives you 40 minutes of working time before it starts to set up. It's 24 hours for a total cure. I happen to like this method just because of that 45 minutes working time. I can apply the epoxy to my panels, set my wing up, and I can check, double check, triple check for any warps, bends, anything not exactly the way I want it before it sets up. So we're going to take you through this. Now, while Chris is vacuuming off the wood and the cores for me, I'm going to go ahead and mix up some epoxy. Now, just to give you some rough ideas, we're doing a wing that when both halves are finished, it comes up at 490 square inches. So we're around 245 squares for one wing half. Now, I can't really remember how much epoxy this particular wing takes, so I'm going to mix up 1 ounce total. Now, I like to use these little medicine cups for mixing my epoxy. They're available at any local drugstore. I think I got a sleeve of 100 of them for about $2.50 or $3. But they're marked, they're graduated on the side, so you can mix up any given amount of epoxy that you want. Now, as memory serves me, we're going to do top and bottom of this wing with under a 1/2 ounce of epoxy. but since I'm not 100% sure, we're going to mix up 1 full ounce, and we'll see what we've got left, just to give you an idea of how much epoxy to expect to use. Now, I've already got a 1/2 ounce of the part B in this cup, so while Chris is vacuuming stuff off, I'll mix in the part A and get it all mixed up, and we'll be ready to go here. Okay, actually, you can go ahead at this point. Sorry, we'll talk about a couple things here. All right, take your time and ensure that your epoxy is mixed up well. One little trick I use, just so I don't lose track of time, is as soon as I finish putting the second part of the epoxy in with the first, I hit the stopwatch on my watch here so I can keep track of myself. And I'll actually spend about 5 minutes stirring this to make sure that I'm 100% mixed. Because when we put this on the wood, we are going to squeegee it back down so that we end up with nothing more than a film of epoxy on this wood. So we don't want to have any parts that aren't thoroughly mixed, or we won't get a good solid bond. Now, while I'm doing this and still stirring here, I'll mention that epoxy, as you know, can be somewhat messy. You get it on your fingers, you get it on this, get it on that. It's a good idea to keep a bottle of rubbing alcohol around. Isopropyl alcohol, same thing. This particular brand is ethyl alcohol. And alcohol is good for cleaning this up. Now, we do use the epoxy straight. Some people have asked me about diluting it with alcohol. I do not dilute it. I use it straight out. Okay, I've got my alcohol here, and I've got a paper towel ready to use. Now, one of the keys to this epoxy method excuse me, is my actual squeegee. This is a piece of 1/16 plywood, about 2 inches by 3 inches, and I just sanded the edges so I'm sure they're flat, and I rounded the edges off so I'm not gouging up my wood, and I rounded the surface this way slightly. Then the big trick, and I don't know if the camera can pick this up or not, is I took a triangular file, and at about 1/4 inch increments here. I made 1 or 2 passes so that I've made some tiny grooves all along the edge of this spatula. We'll try to get in here with the macro focus, see if we can pick that up. Okay, see these tiny grooves? Just 1 or 2 passes with a triangular file, and we've got grooves about every 1/4 inch, and the grooves are only about a 32nd of an inch deep. There we go. That gives you a good idea of them. Alright, and I just have them along the one edge. Both of my side edges are still flat, flush edges that I just rounded off so I don't have any sharp corners. Okay, when we make the final passes of squeegeeing off this epoxy, we will use that edge that I've put those little triangles in, so that we're squeegeeing back down to almost dry balsa, and we'll leave just those very slight ridges where those grooves are cut of epoxy. Alright, so we're going to jump right to it here because we're about 6 minutes into this epoxy. Alright, I just try to pick some up on my mixing tool and get it onto the wood. Don't make big puddles of it. Just work small areas at a time. If you make big puddles, it's going to sit there and soak in before you get back to it with your squeegee. So I stretch it out a little bit. And we're going to keep moving while we're talking here. If you guys come up with any questions, pop right in.
Now this is unheated epoxy. You haven't heated this.
No, this is unheated. It is possible to preheat this epoxy. Take the individual tubes of part A and part B and put them in a pan of warm water, hot water, for about 15 minutes before you're ready to start. Now, that makes it a little bit easier to squeegee. The sacrifice is that you lose some working time. Your 45 minutes of working time is going to drop down to around 25 to 30 minutes. So while it does make it easier to squeegee, you are going to lose working time. I wouldn't suggest you do that the first time you try this method of using epoxy. However, as you get used to what you're doing and can work at it a little faster, that's a good way to do it. Alright, now we've got some epoxy on there. Now we just start squeegeeing it out and trying to spread it all over the wing. Now I've actually taken less than 1/4 ounce of raw epoxy and put on here. Now at this point, I'm not doing anything really in any pre-planned pattern. I'm just trying to go through here and get epoxy basically everywhere and narrow out some of those puddles that I created and just plopping it down there. Now be careful not to get epoxy beyond the edge of this and onto your glass, because you can see that my surface is moving around here on me as I squeegee, and if you run epoxy over the edge, you're going to end up with it on your finished surface, which you definitely do not want. That's right. So at this point, all we're trying to do is spread all this epoxy around.
Scott, I noticed that when you put that on there with your piece of piano wire that you mixed it up with, you had some globs there, and doesn't look like you want to get near as much as you'd think when you first start putting the glue on, because it spreads around real well once you start squeegeeing it.
Right, that's why I mentioned I physically took less than 1/4 ounce of epoxy out of that container, and I can already tell you that I've got a lot of epoxy on this panel. Alright, so I pretty much have the entire piece of wood covered with epoxy, and it's too thick. I have way too much on there, but that's normal, that's to be expected. So now we start taking it off. Okay, I still use my mixing cup, and I'll run the squeegee across here, try to pick up the excess, and put it right back in my cup.
Because all that excess, that's just weight. It's not going to help adhere or help with.
It's only going to be as strong as the foam, no matter what you do. If you bonded that with an arc welder, it would only be as strong as the foam.
All right, now this is dead weight, and we're just going to get rid of it. Now you can see it's getting very whitish in color, I think. And that's actually balsa dust that it's picking up and mixing with the epoxy. Now there's nothing wrong with that. Now I've gone to the side of my squeegee.
The part with no little cuts in it?
All right, the part with no grooves, to get even more epoxy off of the wing. We're going to keep squeegeeing this till we're back down to a point of where it almost looks dry. Just keep scraping it down, picking up the extra, and put it back in our cup. Now you don't actually have to put this epoxy back in the cup. If you own stock in Kimberly-Clark and want to go through a lot of paper towels, you could just keep wiping it off. But in all actuality, there's also nothing wrong with this epoxy, and you could go ahead and use it on your next panel. Now we're going to end up with a ton of epoxy left over here. We're going to have in excess of a ½ ounce left after we've sheeted both sides of this wing.
You're putting a good bit of pressure on that sheeting as you pull that up?
Yes. Yes, I'm trying to squeegee right back down.
What about using a hairdryer now? Not a good idea?
All a hairdryer would do is heat this up and reduce your working time, your available working time. And I tend to be a slow worker myself, so I like all the work time I can get. So I like to look at what I'm doing, think about it as I'm doing it, make sure I haven't forgotten to do something. Sometimes I'll get the epoxy on and I'll suddenly remember that I forgot to vacuum off the cores. I vacuumed the wood and forgot about the cores. So I've got the time to stop and do it.
Got a little safety net of time there at the end.
Right. Okay, see, we just continually keep taking epoxy back off. Alright, now when you've gotten down, and this wood is almost starting to look dry at certain points, I'm going to wipe some of this excess off my squeegee here. Got my paper towel with alcohol sitting on the side. In reserve. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to use that grooved edge and do a final squeegeeing. Now I'm taking this epoxy very close to the edge of the wood, but not going over the edge. If you do, like I just did right there, make sure you keep your wood away from it. You don't want to end up with epoxy on your finished side. And I'm making one final full-length pass with the grooved edge, and if you pick up any more excess, go ahead and get it off. Back in the cup.
This is to make the film or glue more uniform?
Right. As uniform and as light as possible, as thin a coat of epoxy as you can get on here. Okay, one more time because I think I can get just a little more off of here. And you're literally just keep squeegeeing it with that grooved edge until you're not getting any more back off of it. And if you look at it, you'll see that the sheet is all damp with epoxy and just has those tiny little grooves left. Okay, I'm going to set that off to the side. Alright, now we've got our bottom wing cradle here. Alright, you always want to make sure that you keep the wing upright. The cradles are marked for top right and top left. And you always want to keep the top on top because the wing is cut with relation to the bottom of the bottom cradle. So that's all at the bottom of the bottom cradle always goes on your flat work surface. Okay, we're going to set this in that bottom cradle, set our wood panel in.
Have you ever put one in with the glue on the wrong side and glued it to the cradle?
Oh.
just a little thought.
All right, remembering the markings that you made on here, our leading edge is in fact at the leading edge point, and yes, we have the bottom right wood panel. Okay, then we're going to physically take our wing core and set it right on top. Trying to leave approximately a 1/4 inch stick out all the way around. And for the moment, we're just going to give that a gentle press. Okay, and we're going to let that set while we put the epoxy on our top wing sheeting panel. Now I'm wiping this table back off with alcohol because I did overrun epoxy in a couple areas, and I want to make sure that I don't get any on the finished surface of my top panel. Right.
So what we're doing here is Chris is trying this, just trying his hand at it on the upper panel to get a feel for it. Since when we're finished making his video, we're going to do a Derringer wing for him, and he wants to see how to do it himself. This is good practice, and we got Scotty here overseeing him, of course. And
yeah, Bob, you see,
he's been thinking.
Bob Whiteley, I totally didn't, give up on our.
Right. Whiteley, there definitely is a room in the world for the Derringer, and.
Wendy tried to get me to use everything.
It didn't fit in my garbage can, but.
We're just moving the material to cover the entire piece of wood right now.
Definitely good practice.
How am I doing?
Not bad. If you go up on one of the ends of your squeegee now, the non-grooved areas, you see you'll be able to move it around a little bit better.
Oh, I see.
And by kind of keep it a little more upright, and you can kind of use it like a snow plow. And by tipping one way or the other, you can see that you can direct epoxy.
Ah, right to the place.
You know, it might be a thought. Hey, Scotty, I guess got a thought for if a guy was had never done this before. It might be a good idea to take a piece of all scrap wood, just join it, and practice this part of it to get his work, so he's not nervous while he's actually doing a core the first time.
Sure, great idea.
Do a little practice dry run before you actually get into your $250 foam wing.
Especially with the lack of light wood nowadays.
Oh yeah, you don't want to waste your good wood, man.
Was that pretty covered? I think I missed a couple spots there in the center.
Alright, you might want to draw a little more up into this area so you're a little bit closer. Again, use the end of your squeegee and you can direct the movement of epoxy a little bit better.
Scotty, do you ever try those plastic body shop trowels? Are they any good for this or not really?
I presume that they would work, but again, you need to groove them. Because you do want to leave those tiny little notches in there. And I guess I'm probably only a little nervous wondering if the plastic wouldn't tend to scratch the wood up or dig it up. With using the 16th plywood, I'm able to round those corners off, and I'm sure Chris will tell you as he's doing it that he can't really feel it digging in anywhere.
No. And there's nobody who has a pro stunt shop that wouldn't have a piece of 16 plywood. And it's a material we all have around. It's not like you have to buy it or something. You can really get a feel for just how labor-intensive doing a foam wing is. It's not a... I've heard several people moan and groan about the price of foam wings, and they... when they start doing one and they get to this, right around this point, you start to realize you've just got the biggest bargain in the world by getting your wing already sheeted.
All right, Chris, why don't you
I wished I'd have bought mine sheeted.
Yeah, I was starting to think that too.
Why don't you go across the tip cord? You're getting yourself a fair puddle out there.
Oh, out here.
Yeah, through there.
Let's catch
Sure, I was going to try and...
It all winds up on a trailing edge there. Okay, good.
All right, it's all dead weight, so you want to get as much off as you can. Here, let me take the stir stick out of here on you. We don't need that anymore.
I'm done with that.
So we don't spill epoxy all over the table.
It looked so easy when Scott was doing this.
Well, that's why I said it'd be a real good idea if somebody was doing this for the first time, that was an entry-level person or their first foam wing, Give it a dry run, a practice run, before you go ahead and take your best wing or whatever, prowler kit or whatever you'd be using this on.
Now actually, as soon as we're done blocking up this wing, we're going to turn things over to Wendy, and we're going to let him show you his spray adhesive method of sheeting a foam wing.
And by the way, one thing we all want to emphasize, Scotty and myself, there's definitely several good ways to sheet wings. These are two of the best ways that I know of. This way has some advantages. Spray adhesive has some advantages, and I certainly have no final comment on which way would be the world-beating best way. I think both ways could work. Both ways have some merit. Both ways have advantages and disadvantages, and what would be a good idea is, having watched this video, if this is your first one, do your one set of wings, say on your first ship, one way, the second set the opposite way, the spray adhesive or epoxy way, and then make a decision of which way you like the best. There's definitely a lot of ways to do this.
Go to the groove side.
All right, make your last series of passes.
So I picked it up pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He's got this pretty good. Whiteley, be impressed. He may be ordering wings from you next year.
He says he does have trouble getting stuff from John.
I've heard that before. And John always uses up the scrap sheeting on his wing.
I didn't say that, John.
Sorry, John.
And I plead ignorance. I've got no idea what either one of them's talking about.
Now, a good example of this, what we're talking about,
John
is
will.
Greenaway's made literally hundreds of these wings, and he's done a lot of them with epoxy and a lot with spray adhesive. He's done them both different, both ways.
Both techniques he uses?
Yeah, he uses both.
So there's really no set advantage for either one?
Well,
Just whatever you like?
I think it's personal preference. It's like coffee or tea. I think they both work.
One more pass right across through here.
All the way, or?
All the way.
Oh, I
right.
can see, yeah.
The only
Little more
disadvantage,
material in there.
the only disadvantage I see to this way is you would need a little practice to get the second or third one to come out perfect.
I still got a little more material in here that I could pick up.
Yeah, you're actually down to an acceptable level there. You're done pretty good.
Now, have you ever weighed that skin to see how much epoxy is still? Can you do it by weight?
Well,
Not acceptable.
I would think that you would have to weigh everything before you put the epoxy on, and then weigh everything after it dried.
No, I mean, if you weighed the skin and it was 20 grams, and then you scraped off the epoxy and you said, okay, there's 4 grams of epoxy per skin, assuming it was spread out nice, would that be an acceptable way to tell somebody for their first time how much epoxy to leave on the wing?
Well, knowing that we started with 1 ounce, when we're done here, we're going to be able to look at that cup, see how much we've got left, and be able to tell them exactly how much we used on 245 square inches of wing.
Right, right.
Okay.
What about this tip here? I got a little...
You're set there, that's all right.
That's okay?
Yeah, you look good.
All right.
Good job.
Thanks.
Hey.
All right, now just set that off over here on the side so it's not in your way. And go ahead and turn it over and position it on top of the core.
All right, this is the top right with the leading edge pointing forward. There's the leading edge. I
Yeah,
can
you
tell
gotta
because
spin
it's
it around.
swept. Turn it around. The glue's going to go on the wing. That's
The grain parallel to the leading edge.
got it all cut
Scotty, you
that
do
way.
nice work. You should go in business. Chris is looking for a job anyway. Airlines are going to let him go pretty soon.
Okay, now just take your hand and give it a quick press down.
Do you try to avoid moving it once you set it down, or?
More epoxy right there.
Or if you got some on the sheeting, just a little alcohol on a rag will wipe it right off. You don't want to leave any epoxy on the outside of your skin.
Getting the dreaded cradle stick.
Right.
Cradle from hell.
Okay, so then we're going to take our top wing cradle.
Yeah, that's good, Chris.
All right, why don't you turn back a little towards this direction, Wendy.
Okay.
Just still on here. Now, at this point, you want to realign the core and the cradles.
Just for sake of reference, what's the time on your watch?
Time on the watch is 27 minutes.
27 to get this in the state we're in right now.
Okay, you want to align all the edges so that they're back just like they were before we put the sheeting on. How am I doing this way, Chris? You got a better angle there than I do.
Need to right up one on the bottom, and now looks lined up there.
Okay, so once we get everything lined back up like this, we would now take a lot of weight and try to distribute it fairly evenly over the tops of this wing cradle, still with our bottom resting on our flat surface. Now, typically at home in my own shop, I actually use concrete patio blocks. They're solid concrete, about 1.5 inches thick, and they measure probably 10 inches by 18 inches. I would put 2 of those on this wing, one in this direction and one running this way, and that would hold this all down fairly flush. Now that would represent somewhere between 50 and 70 pounds being on this wing. Alright, we're going to take a look around here and see what we can find to weight this down, but something that you can find in almost anybody's shop is 4 or 5 years worth of model airplane magazines. So you can just take
Or Playboys.
yeah, 75 to 100 flying models or model airplane news, whatever it is you've got, and just start stacking them up on here to give you roughly 50 pounds worth of weight. You want somewhere between 50 and 70 pounds on this surface.
And you want that on a dead flat table now, not to be on a cellar floor where it's, you know, wavy or anything.
Exactly. If your work surface is not flat and level,
Get a couple gallons of fuel first.
if it's twisted or something, you're going to form that twist right into this wing. But as long as you're holding it down, weighting it down flat on a flat surface, you're going to come out with a perfectly flat wing. Now, just for the time being, we're going to set a couple gallons of fuel on here.
Is it alright to set those bare bottles right on that?
Right, because we're on the cradle, it'll distribute the weight. It'll hold us in place here.
What you don't want to do, and I've heard somebody that did it, is take something that weighs like 150 pounds and place it on there because it will distort it. 50 to 70 seems reasonable, but fuel is what, 6 pounds a gallon? That seems like on the low side, but you know, it would be easy to crush that core right now.
Yeah, between 50 and 70 pounds total per wing panel is plenty. Now this tends to be a smaller wing. Like I say, this whole airplane is only 490 square inch wing. So we're on 245 inches, square inches of wing here. So 50 pounds would be more than sufficient for this particular wing. Now after we've got it weighted down, the next thing we want to do is just go along and check our leading and trailing edges and make sure that they're in fact making contact with the foam core itself. Now some wings that tend not to have too sharp of a leading edge actually won't make contact here, especially if you've over sanded at the leading edge and start to tear that, to eat that away. So you'll physically look in between the two sheets and ensure that you're getting good contact in there. Now if you're not, you know, if you touch this and you saw from down below that, you know, it's moving in there and sealing a gap, you could physically take some paper cardstock. I'm going to steal Wendy's note off his wall here that reserves.
There's some down there that don't have dirty writing on them.
Okay, and you could just slide it in here like this with your weight there.
Again, that's not going
To
between
close
the sheeting
that
and the
gap.
core, it's going between the...
The wood and the top cradle.
Yeah, right, let's see that.
Now, if I had the weights on here that I would normally use, like I said, those concrete blocks or magazines, the weight would be all the way out to the edge of the top cradle. And you can see when I do that, this card is now caught. So there actually was good contact here in the first place. But it is something that you should take a look at, and if you have a problem there, correct it right now. Like I say, you can use cardstock and insert it between the sheeting and the cradle and re-weight it. Another easy way to go at that, the masking tape, here we go. The problems usually occur at the leading edge rather than the trailing edge if you're going to have a problem, but make sure that you check both. Now, if you do find that you have a problem, another way to go at it is to take some short pieces of masking tape, stick them to the bottom, put a little upward pressure on the bottom piece, put a little pressure on the top piece downward, and just tape them together like that to put some compression in there. And you can go along the leading edge and do it at about every 1.5 or 2 inches. And just pull that together. You can keep doing this all the way down here, or just, wherever you have a problem. And that's about all you're going to do to this wing at this point. Remember that we had epoxy that gave us 45 minutes worth of working time and takes 24 hours for a total cure. Now, we've been at this for 33 minutes and 25 seconds since I first put the part A in with the part B. And we still have another 12 minutes that we could feasibly spend checking, correcting, doing whatever, getting this weighted down. If we're running all over the place trying to find magazines, can't find our concrete blocks, whatever. We still have 12 minutes left that we could use if we needed it. That's about it. Chris, do you have any questions after watching this done?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you didn't have something to cover the entire surface, you just had gallons of fuel. If you had a piece of wood, that would cover that whole surface, and put meaning hardwood, piece of board, 2x4 or something. You
Kind of
put
a
that on
flat
there.
piece of wood.
That would cover all your edges, and maybe that would help to push that down around it.
Right.
In a more uniform way.
Right. What you really like to do is just distribute the weight as evenly as you can over the entire wing. I have these metal weights that you've seen me use a couple of times today. I have them, like I say, in various lengths.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, if I'm doing multiple wings and my concrete blocks are consumed, I'll lay these metal weights across here, and one would typically, I would take a longer one that would typically end up looking like that, and put them across here, and then I would take things like fuel and set on top of it, and that helps distribute the weight out so that I'm getting even pressure over the whole wing.
I see.
Okay, so...
Just mention one of the things what not to do, which I just did, is I was real tired at the end of the night, and I used an old can of lacquer thinner that had a rusty bottom, and by the time the morning came, yeah, give them a show. This is what your wing and core will look like by the morning. Nuclear meltdown, get your cores from Chernobyl. That cost me $150 for that mistake, so learn from my mistake. Don't use old rusty cans. Jugs usually don't leak, but in fact, try to get your weights set up ahead of time. Don't be a windy.
And one of the safest things to use is model airplane magazines. I think we all collect them, and it's usually no problem to come up with 100 model airplane magazines. And 100 magazines would be more than a sufficient amount of weight to stack up on this wing. They also are usually wide enough, they're 8.5 by 11 magazines, so that they would overlap both edges and help distribute your weight evenly. And if you didn't have enough, if you only had like 20 or 30 magazines, put the magazines down first and then set gallons of fuel on top of those. And the magazines would help distribute the weight more evenly.
You could just get a bathroom scale and weigh out 50 pounds of magazines.
Sure.
Newspapers or whatever.
And they don't have to be model airplane magazines. There's always Better Housekeeping, House and Garden, whatever. Okay, now we're going to go back and show you the contact spray adhesive method that Wendy uses. So we're going to take this wing and put it somewhere else and try to get it weighted down and let it cure for 24 hours.
trying to do the second half of this video, which will be joining the sheeting on with 3M cement. Just give you a couple of little words about 3M cement here before we get any further into it. This is one can that 3M. This is 3M Super 77 spray adhesive, high tack, high coverage, blah 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 blah. One can that 3M cement comes in. It comes in another can that looks like this. I don't know if the formula is exactly the same, but it's certainly useful. These both work fine. It also comes this way in this can. And I don't know what the difference in all of these are. But when you ask for 3M 77 cement, you can get any one of these cans. There's one type of 3M 77 cement you don't want to get. And it'll have an N after the 77. 77N will melt foam. All of these cements I just showed you are fine, but you don't want to use the 3M 77N. N will melt the foam. And one of the things you have to do with this cement for sure is really spend your time shaking it up. Make sure you don't have the N number or it's going to melt the foam. Shake the heck out of it. It just doesn't seem like you can shake this too much. You get two tips with every can of cement. Under the cap there's an extra tip. When you're done spraying, hold it upside down and spray a little bit out. Read the directions. It's a good idea to use this in a well-ventilated area. You can really get sick from the smell of this. Just like any kind of glue, there tends to be stuff that smells in it, and if you're allergic to it, you can get sick.
Run a small bead and then quickly wipe it down with your finger.
Now what Chris is doing is we got a little crack in the glue joint from sanding and turning the sheeting over. You might hear a click. You get a little crack, of course you repair it before you go on to the next step.
That's it, wipe it right down. Wax paper back on here.
Again, we're just doing the final prep on the wing skins that we'll use on the spray adhesive side. Trying to get Chris to do as much hands-on work as we can so he gets the experience. He's going to be doing his own wing right after we're finished with this video. This will give him a little high-tech stuff. Got one leg of that pants worn out yet, boy?
We're getting there, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Phones are on, right?
Candle on it up to the light.
This is the low.
Don't.
All right. Clean his shop up, guys. And that skin is ready to go?
All right, now before you move it around too much, mark it up so you don't lose your orientation.
Mark it up. This will be
Got your arrows on there?
arrow to the leading edge to the top left. And home side, home side. Oh, we did it right. It's incredible, but it's true.
Now I'll just mention while these guys are working that when you're doing spray adhesive, it's even more important to get it vacuumed perfectly clean than with epoxy. I think the spray glue will tolerate less the amount of glue, the amount of dust that it'll allow and still get a good bond. What I like to do also, if you have an air hose in the house, if you have a compressor, is jack the compressor up to about 50 pounds and just blow the rest of the dust right out. And usually, even after you vacuum it, you'll get even more out with an air hose. The cleaner you can make it at this point in time, the better off you're going to be, for sure. Try to get the whole environment around where you're working clean, so you can kind of get it, give it a chance that you're not going to have dust from another area just drop down onto it. The first step I like to do is I lay out, obviously, which side I'm going to glue to which side. I want to line up the leading edge. He's already got arrows on that. That's good. We've got enough material. We've got enough sticking off on each edge in each direction. Okay. This is going to be the side we do first. So I'll take these two parts. Where did I put that can of glue that I sprayed on? I'm just putting down on the floor for now. And this is where we do our spray gluing in this shop. Take can of glue. The reason I'm doing it down in this corner is because this glue gets everywhere. And if you were to do it up, certainly you can't do this on your kitchen table, that's for sure. That side is done. You can just put that up on the table. Now this corner probably has a 1/4 inch of glue on the floor already from doing this. Again, you don't have to go crazy putting thousands of coats of glue on. One coat is usually enough. Now the critical thing with doing this kind of a job is knowing when to press the parts together. As soon as you can pick them up with your bare hands. And we can't do that yet. This is not sticky enough, just let it dry up, tack up. Eventually this is going to get tacky enough that we'll be able to pick the part up with the tips of your fingers. There we go, starting to kick off now. Little by little. Just let it sit for a minute or so. And you can pick the part right up off the table. It's ready to go. Starting to kick in now. Generally that time is usually a minute, minute and a half. They tell you on a can 30 seconds, but I don't know. Just keep doing your little test. This one is almost ready to go. You can tell by just being able to pick it up. Now it's really starting to get. Now, just before we roll these together, I'm going to mention a couple things. Get this off my hand. One of the things you don't ever want to do is miss on the first shot. You get one shot to do this. You get one chance. If you miss on the first chance, you throw the wing and sheeting away, and that's usually a whole day of work. So you want to definitely think about this and get all the alignments right before you go ahead and do anything. Don't just reach over, because once you press it down, you're finished. The other thing we're going to try to do is we're going to try to do a roll. We start on the leading edge and actually roll back. So obviously, if you want a flat table, you want one advantage of doing this, whether it's a big advantage or not, is that as soon as we're done sheeting this, we can put the leading and trailing edges right on and sand the wing, and we're done. Normally, epoxy would have to sit in the cores overnight. So if time is a big factor in your program, this might be the way you want to try it. If it isn't a big factor, well, it doesn't matter then. Okay, just to go over this again, this is to the point where we can pick it right off the table. That's the right stickiness. You can do the same thing to the core. That's fine. Give it another couple seconds. Remember again, you're only going to get one shot at doing this. Might be a good idea if you're doing this, as opposed to epoxy, you might want to leave the wood hang out even a little bit longer than normal. Of course, you have a permanent bond now. That's on there for the duration, other than the fact that you're going to have to babysit the leading and trailing edges a little bit. What I like to do then is give this a minute or so just to set up. The only reason for doing this is when you put the next piece of sheeting on, you won't get the two pieces joining together either at the front or the back and sticking together, and then you can't get the knife in there nice and clean. It's a lot easier to, just an easy thing. Easier to do it right now. I do almost all the wings that I do, all the ones that I've done with the contact cement. But certainly both ways have merit, and you should try both. Let me just get back, you do the other one, and we can set this aside. I'm trying to do this in a way that you can see it on camera. It's a little awkward. Might be a good idea to wear a mask when you're going to do quite a bit of this foam work. This glue has a real awful smell to it. I don't like the smell.